And now on Newsmaker, we're joined on the telephone with former Seattle police officer Steve Pomper. Steve, I want to thank you for joining us.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
Well, Steve, if you could give us a brief rundown as to what has happened in Seattle where you used to work at the police department. Now, things are only just recently in the last 72 hours kind of calming down and getting a little bit back to normal. But up to this point, what was it like to live under this whole CHOP rule?
You know, it's really strange, and just to lay a little bit of a foundation, I was on the police department for about 22 years before I retired, and I was in that building that everybody's seeing splashed on the news across the country, the Chaz or CHOP area. I served there for 21 of those years, and it's just crazy because Seattle is a very, protest-prone city anyway. You know, we went through WTO back in 1999, and from then on, there's been protests all over the place, and the Seattle East Precinct is so protest-prone that we even once in the 90s had some protesters come up to protest the Navy doing practice bombing in Puerto Rico. So it's like they don't need much of an excuse. This time what they've done, and we've had to protect the precinct over and over the last couple decades from these folks. And right now, they came up and they got violent. There was even a shooting out in front of the precinct, despite the fact that they say they're mostly peaceful protesters. And rather than defend the precinct, the mayor decided to order the police chief to abandon the building. I mean, they pretty much locked it up, put some barriers around, put some fencing around the windows, and they left the area.
This is really an unusual situation in 21st century modern America. We're talking with a former Seattle police officer named Steve Pomper. He writes for a website called lifezet.com. He's written a book called Depolicing America. His slogan is cop, libertarian, and author. And Steve, when you see what's happened to the Seattle Police Department, as far as leadership from the mayor goes and the decision that you just talked about, what does that make you think, and what do you think is going through the minds of the members of the police department in Seattle?
As far as, our mayor, Jenny Durkin, has an interesting history with the police department. She's probably exactly the wrong person to be in charge of it. Back in 2012, when they put the consent decree, or what I call the bogus consent decree, on the Seattle Police Department, she was the U.S. attorney for the Northwest District for, under the Obama Holder administrations. And when they did all that, with a lot of the politics involved in the law enforcement, they didn't even release the methodology of how they came up with their statistics about how we were abusing people. And they never even released it to the city. And to this day, they still haven't released it, and yet they put all these, impositions on officers that started the whole depolicing, thing at that time. And the officers are just so frustrated because we've watched our fellow officers get disciplined, get fired, have all other types of ramifications simply for doing their jobs. I mean, doing their job the way we were taught. It's like we'll be taught something in the academy or in training, and then only after we get involved in a situation that looks bad, on film. And I'll tell you what, every use of force looks bad. There's no such thing as a good-looking use of force.
Right.
And what they'll do is they'll exploit it because it's become controversial, and then they'll basically, hammer the officers. I know several officers personally who've been fired that it was absolutely unjustified.
I've seen videos on Tucker Carlson's show on Fox and other places of Antifa groups harassing drivers in traffic in Seattle, Washington. There was a pretty well-known video of a senior citizen, an elderly male, driving down the street trying to get through the Antifa and being chased, and I think even attacked by Antifa. What's it like to drive around in Seattle these days?
Oh, it's not great to drive in Seattle anyway because they've got this whole, political thing where they've taken away a lot of the streets. They put bicycles lanes and made them pedestrian walkways. So that's bad enough. But as far as you never know when you go down there when some Antifa person is going to attack you. Just the other night they had a business that was just outside the CHOP Chaz zone, and someone called and let them know that somebody was messing with their business. So they came down to see what was going on, and they called the police. And they got there first, the owners did, opened the door, smoke was coming out. One of the guys ran around the back and caught the person who had started the fire inside and broken in. They had him pinned down. They called the police. Police still didn't come. A crowd from Antifa, Black Lives Matter, had gathered and were basically threatening. And the son of the owner said that they were saying, if you don't let him go, we're going to kill you. They said they called the police 17 times and got no response. When the police chief addressed the situation, she said, no, we did dispatch officers and we have a report, but we had them position themselves from a distance. And they looked in, and incredibly, she said, they didn't see any smoke or any fire or any disturbance, so they basically left. That is not a police response. That's embarrassing. And so people driving through, if they're going to harass brick and mortar building that's right there, they're going to harass anybody who tries to come through their area. And I would not have my family, drive down there. The outskirts of Seattle, kind of the outer neighborhoods maybe, but not anything towards the core at all. Way too dangerous.
We're speaking with a former Seattle police officer, Steve Pomper. Looking at a website here, nationalpolice.org, you have an article from 3 months ago. How should officers deal with verbally aggressive anti-police groups? And the article goes on to say that, there are some organizations that just simply call themselves watchdogs. That's not the case. They're not out there to keep things at an even keel and make sure things don't get out of hand. They are there to make sure pretty much that things get out of hand. Your thoughts there?
Yeah, well, I think that's a lot of the misunderstanding like that is by setting yourself up as a watchdog, but yet when you're actually, promoting, a specific agenda, and what you're watching out for is, sentiments that you don't agree with or political ideals you don't agree with, rather than actually wanting to objectively, deal with a problem. It's kind of like what we have right now with the mixture of, we have the, sort of the lowercase Black Lives Matter, which the statement you go, well, of course. It seems like an insult to even, require somebody to say it, because where's the humanity? If you can't say that, then we have that, conflated with the capital Black Lives Matter, which is a Marxist organization, which a lot of people don't know about, and and when that gets blended, then you're dealing with folks that, on one side, they have good intentions, but they're absolutely being exploited by people in the organization and who want to shift America. They are exploiting them. The other day, in Seattle, in front of the East Precinct, they were talking to this woman about peaceful protest, being peaceful. She said, "I don't want to be peaceful." She said, "I'm a disruptor. We need to tear things down before we can build them up." And that's an absolute Antifa, Black Lives Matter, the capital Black Lives Matter agenda. Some
would say that the lesson of what's happened in places like Seattle, where the police department is shut down, is this is the kind of lawlessness that you get when you defund or shut down a police department.
Exactly right. If you talk about, guardians of liberty, that's what I always thought that the police are. That's their thing. We deal with the Constitution every single day, First Amendment, Second Amendment, Fourth, Fifth, Sixth, and just keep going. And we have to deal with that all the time. So that's uppermost in our minds, and we understand that society doesn't exist and doesn't function peacefully unless there is security in the form of a police department. You look at things like, for instance, Haiti, when they had the earthquake. Rioting, looting, nothing could, as far as when the French and the Americans went in to try to keep peace, they couldn't distribute food, they couldn't start rebuilding until they had security. So they basically brought in people to police the area. And it's the same thing in areas like this. In Seattle, if you have another department that's ready to walk off like Atlanta did yesterday, this city is ripe for it.
Some of the talk show hosts argue that these riots are leading to something else, and that there's Marxist ties to a lot of these protests that we've seen. And it goes without saying that communist countries aren't known for having terribly friendly police departments.
Oh, you're exactly right. I mean, a police agency is only as good as the society that's, sponsoring it, or, the system that's using it. I mean, I remember one time, and not even going to the communist systems, but how much we have such a great system here. I had a Dutch officer ride with me one time, and I was telling him, I said, yeah, okay, I'm watching this person driving. He's kind of, swerving a little bit. And I said, yeah, I mean, not like an intoxication thing, but just a little, thing over the line. And I said, yeah, well, I'm going to wait and see what he does next, and then I pull him over. And this Dutch officer looked at me and said, you mean you need a reason to pull him over? And this is, a liberal democracy in Europe. And yet he was flabbergasted that in the United States we had to have a reason to pull somebody over, to talk to them. And just multiply that by, 1,000 times if you go to a place, North Korea, China, Venezuela, Cuba. So people they don't appreciate what they have here, and they also shouldn't underestimate that the people who are trying to change the system right now, it's not that they're ignorant or don't understand it, although that might be part of it too. They know what they want. They're not political opponents, they're political enemies, and I think there's a big distinction there.
You've written a book, Steve Pomper, called Depolicing of America. Tell us about that book.
Yeah, it was Depolicing America, Street Cops' View of the Anti-Police State. And, I started writing it when I was still on the job, because I just felt like I needed to try to explain to people, because I think part of the problem is the education for police, what police do, why they do it, how they do it is really, woefully bad. It's just, how they have PSAs for everything on earth, but they never really do PSAs for what we do. And if they did, I think that could help a lot. But, like, for instance, civilians will look at a use of force on TV and say, oh, wow, that's bad. There's no way he should have done that. While at the same time, trained police officers are watching the same thing and said, oh, yeah, that's what I would have done. Because they're not explaining. And so when you have a high-profile incident happen in a particular jurisdiction, instead of coming out and explaining what's going on, the hierarchy immediately goes to politics. How does this look? Which side do we want to be on? And then, they'll end up, basically joining the chorus against the officer when the cops know he did exactly like he was trained, or she did exactly like she was trained. And it's really frustrating to see that happen. And it happens a lot, and it's happening today a lot.
Talking with Steve Pomper, former Seattle police officer, author of Depolicing America. His slogan is Comp, Libertarian, and author. Steve Pomper, the name George Soros has come up a lot in connection with Antifa. Basically, what a lot of the conservatives argue is that Soros funds Antifa. Antifa goes out and stirs up quite the storms in these different big cities. The protests go from peaceful protests in some cases to out-and-out riots. And Antifa was recently exposed by Project Veritas. Project Veritas got Antifa on video admitting that they like to poke people's eyes out at these riots, and in these situations with the police. And I wanted to ask a question to you about this, because Soros denies having anything to do with any of this. He's like, who, me? Antifa, the same thing. Antifa and their supporters claim that Antifa is infiltrated by other groups, and these other groups put on these outfits and go out and commit terrible crimes in Antifa's name. Antifa's totally innocent. What do you make of those arguments?
Dressing up like Antifa and going out and doing this right. Well, George Soros, he might have a certain amount of genius and obviously plenty of cash. But diabolical can also be put to his name. He's got a reputation throughout the world for his actions to damage economies in Europe, and now he's trying to do it here. And the thing is that there's this unholy alliance that he's kind of gotten together, where not only is he funding groups like Antifa or Black Lives Matter or Color of Change or any of those other things, but also he's pouring money into prosecutors' races, district attorneys' races across America in different jurisdictions, and it's just, you can see the effect now. There's Larry Krasner in Philadelphia, who basically has come out and called his police department, the police officers, Nazis. I mean, this guy, he I don't know if he'd know how to prosecute a criminal. If one actually attacked him, it's like, and when that's happening, the latest one was in San Francisco, and the guy, his first job out of, I think he went to Harvard, but it was one of the Ivy Leagues. Anyway, the guy's first job out of college was to work down in Venezuela for Hugo Chavez. I mean, we're talking about real infiltration. I mean, there's another one in Suffolk County, Massachusetts, which contains Boston, where the woman got elected to office saying that she wouldn't prosecute 15. She had a list of 15 crimes she called nonviolent, and one of those crimes was resisting arrest. The last time I checked, resisting arrest tends to be somewhat violent. So, that's where Soros is really insidious in how he's affecting America. And, of course, the money gets diffuse as it sends out to these little organizations, and then he can divorce himself from it because, no, I gave it to this organization, but then they gave it to this one, they gave it to this one, gave it to it kind of goes out like that. So there's always some kind of deniability.
Steve, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be back in just a moment. Stay with us.
This is an advertisement. Paid non-attorney spokesperson Ricky LeBlanc admitted in Massachusetts only. Sokolov Law, LLC, Chestnut Hill, Mass. Paul J. Morgan, Winter Park, Florida. Greg Hoppy, New Jersey. Michael Bro Gonzalez, admitted Louisiana. While this firm maintains joint responsibility, most cases of this type are referred to other attorneys for principal responsibility. Mesothelioma. If you know what mesothelioma is, you or someone you love has likely been affected by this devastating cancer. You may be entitled to compensation. Call Sokolov Law today. 1-800-578-2400. The only known cause of mesothelioma is asbestos exposure. Thousands of U.S. veterans and trade workers are at risk for the disease. Nearly $30 billion in court-ordered trusts has been set aside to pay money to asbestos victims. If you or a loved one has been diagnosed with mesothelioma, call now. You may be able to receive compensation without ever going to court or filing a lawsuit. Call for a free legal consultation at 1-800-578-2400. That's 1-800-578-2400.
Checking in now with meteorologist Rob Carroll, who says another nice day, but watch for a storm.
That's right, Brian. There could be some thunderstorms around later this afternoon, so keep that in mind. But right now, gorgeous out there. Wall-to-wall sunshine across the southern tier. I am seeing some cloudiness, though, just entering New York State around the Jamestown area, then through Erie, Pennsylvania to around Cleveland. And as I look at the radar, lo and behold, near Canton, Ohio, we've got a thunderstorm developing. So it's a little bit of instability there, and that will lift across the area this afternoon. So abundant sunshine. You'll notice as the day goes on, Brian, if you're outside laying on the hillside next to the station, a few cumulus clouds will pop up, and a couple of those could turn into a shower or storm during the afternoon. Our temperatures today, 75 to 80. Sunrise this morning was at 5:36. Notice the sun's now starting to come up later, but it's still setting at 8:51. We're clear to partly cloudy overnight, comfortable, 55 to 60. Any showers and thunderstorms die out early in the evening. Tomorrow, partial sun, highs will be up to 80 to 85. A low-pressure system headed our way from the Dakotas tomorrow night. That'll lead to showers and thunderstorms after midnight, 60 to 65. And there's a very good chance for some showers and thunderstorms, unfortunately, Saturday. It'll be breezy, 80 to 85. We're partly sunny, a little cooler for Sunday.
Back with former Seattle police officer Steve Pomper, author of Depolicing America, A Street Cop's View of the Anti-Police State. And it says, anti-police groups have fabricated a myth that cops are wantonly slaughtering the innocent. They cite the numbers of suspects killed by police as if it's supposed to be a fair fight. But there is another profession where people claim to know how to do it better. What's going on, Steve, with that?
Yeah, it's a combination of a lot of things, but it's interesting that, like, for instance, Shelby Steele, out of the Hoover Institution at Stanford, has been, on television a lot lately talking about this situation. And he said one of the things that's very cultural is, he said, for him, the black community has a unique situation where we tend to put criminals or wrongdoers up, on a pedestal after they've done, bad things. They get, they're shot by the police, but they've committed a crime, and they've got themselves kind of into that situation. And no matter what the situation was, either the police officer, didn't, the I'll get it right here. The suspect, didn't point the gun at him yet, or didn't have the gun out yet, or didn't fire a shot yet. I mean, it keeps getting higher and higher. The standard of from that, and then people are so afraid to criticize anything that they don't challenge when this happens. Was it? I was trying to think of the gal who does the Blexit thing.
Candace Owens.
Candace Owens. She was saying too. She said she echoed his thoughts, saying that nobody wants to say, "Wait a minute, you're wrong," because then they'll be called racist. And so I think that's causing a lot of problems with the situation.
We've been speaking with former Seattle police officer Steve Pomper, author of Depolicing America. Steve, what's your website and how can people read your articles more?
Well, I write for National Police Association, and they're at nationalpolice.org, as you mentioned earlier, kindly. And then I'm at stevepomper.com. And that pretty much links to the other places where I write.
And Pomper is spelled Pomper, stevepomper.com. Former Seattle police officer Steve Pomper, I want to thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, hey, it's been my pleasure. I'll come back anytime.